Hello, Chandel. So when we were originally discussing your research need, you wanted to know what rules and regulations and sort of what restrictions existed out there for bringing animals into the classroom or bringing the classroom to go and interact with animals. In my searches, there were two documents that were consistently referenced throughout a variety of board policies for different boards, one being the Education Act. Specifically, they were referencing section 265, which is, sorry, bear with me, which outlines the responsibilities of the principal in protecting the care of students. So, give assiduous attention to the health and comfort of the pupils, to the cleanliness, temperature, and ventilation of the school, and yada yada yada. So generally when schools are or boards are coming up with school policies regarding health and safety, they reference this document and note that it is primarily the responsibility of the principal, or they are sort of the be-all and end-all of health and wellness of students. Additionally, board documents also reference the Animals for Research Act when they're talking about policies regarding bringing animals into schools. And this led me to find a document written by the Canadian Council on Animal Care, which is a guide to the care and use of experimental animals. So this is sort of like an operationalized version of the Animals for Research Act, which outlines what you are responsible for as a researcher in protecting and respecting the needs and caring for the animals that you might be experimenting with. So this really only applies if the animals you're bringing into the classroom are for experimental purposes. So it doesn't really cover if you're bringing in a classroom pet just to have a classroom pet, or if you just have them brought in for visitation and whatnot. So really it would only be pertinent if you're planning on experimenting with the animals. It might be something of interest, sections of it. You could scroll through and go over them with your class if you were planning on using animals for experiments, say racing your class rats and whatnot. Because, I mean, it would give an authentic learning experience for like, hey, this is what real researchers have to do, and we're going to act like real researchers and care for these animals as guidelines suggest. So, I mean, it's somewhat interesting, but far more in depth than anything you probably need, particularly since it's only pertaining to experimental animals. From there, I kind of asked what board you were looking at specifically, because all these rules and guidelines seem to be board specific. And you said you were in the Kawartha Pine Ridge District School Board. So the two documents that I found to support your research need was the Program Safety Out of Classroom Programs document and the Emergency Preparedness document. Again, both of these documents really just reiterated that health and safety is the responsibility of the principal. Additionally, they added that if you're dealing with animals that have high incidences of rabies or high tendencies of rabies, that you should make these notions aware to the staff and students that would be handling them if you were to come across animals. That was outlined in the emergency preparedness document. And that that teachers, parents, students, they should all be made aware of individual student health concerns and health conditions, so that you would be prepared to deal with any incidences as such. So that was the only information in those documents that was particularly helpful. So from there, for the research portion of this assignment and finding peer-reviewed articles, I turned more so to documents relating to the theory behind using animals and their benefits on health and well-being. So the first article I looked at was Occupational Therapy in Incorporating Animals for Children with Autism. This was a pilot investigation. It was a really small scale study. It only involved 22 students with autism over a 15-week period wherein they received at least one occupational therapy session a week, which was on average about a half hour. So the study aimed at comparing the effects of social interaction, intrinsic motivation for social interaction, increased use of language, and increased desire of social behaviors when animals were introduced to therapy sessions versus occupational therapy sessions that relied on traditional methods without animals present. So the study found that when animals were introduced, the outcomes were positive, and that there was an increase in social interaction, there was an increase in intrinsic motivation for social interaction, there was an increase for use of language, and there was an increase for desired social behaviors. Again, however, the study is limited in its generalizability due to the small sample size. However, the literature review for this article I thought was particularly interesting, considering the conversation that we had during the interview. So I highlighted some of the information that I thought you might find interesting. The article mentioned biophilia, which is that humans have adapted to be attentive to both human and non-human life forms in the environment, and that children exhibit a natural interest towards animals and other non-human aspects of the environment. So I thought this kind of tied into your understanding that we as humans crave sort of touch, interaction, and sort of intimacy with our environment, and that we're often denied this in institutional settings. So I thought this was something that you might find interesting, or theory you might find interesting. Also, sort of, I guess, topical, it mentioned the book Thinking in Pictures and Other Reports from My Life with Autism, which is by Temple Grandin, Dr. Grandin. And she mentioned that being autistic has helped me to understand how animals feel and how people often fail to observe animals. So I thought this was pretty reminiscent of things that you just spoke about, and how Jane Goodall presented her findings in that video that inspired your sort of thinking for this particular research topic, and that we are animals, and as animals we often think and feel and act similarly. So I thought that was interesting. Also, if you're interested, Temple Grandin, she was a subject for the film Temple Grandin, which came out in 2010, relatively recently, which it's about her biographic of Temple Grandin, an autistic woman who has become one of the top scientists in the main livestock handling industry. From my understanding, she completely revolutionized sort of the cattle industry based on her ability to understand the behavior of cows because of her autism and her intrinsic understanding of the animals. So this, I think, would certainly be something that you might find interesting. But back to the article. It mentioned several studies that fell in line with theories that you had touched on during our interview. Children spontaneously identified their pets as sources of emotional support when they were sad, angry, happy, or wanting to share a secret, and parents of these children rated them as less anxious and withdrawn when compared to age matched children who did not use pets for support. These children other children have also been with pets have expressed more empathy towards peers than those without. So I thought this was kind of interesting. So you'd mentioned that one autistic student in your class that would often reference a picture of their dog as a means of calming them down. So I thought that kind of fell in line with things that you had observed out on placement. Animal-assisted therapy is also associated with lower blood pressure, reductions in anxiety among patients with psychotic and mood disorders. And in autistic children specifically, Goodman found that children with autism demonstrated fewer stereotype behaviors such as hand posturing and humming, and increased social appropriate behaviors such as joining with therapists in simple games when a dog was introduced to sessions. Pervasive developmental disorders demonstrated children with pervasive developmental disorders demonstrated more playful mood, greater focus, and greater awareness in their social environments when there was a live dog present in the sessions versus when there was a stuffed animal. And because you are an avid horseback rider, finally studies of therapeutic horseback riding in both adults and children with a range of handicapping conditions repeatedly demonstrate that this intervention produces improvements in balance, muscle tone, coordination, and posture. There was a study in Washington that studied mentally handicapped children in a horseback riding program that noted improvements in motor skill, language skills, emotional control, and peer relations. So overall, the study's findings were interesting, but I just thought their literature review aligned pretty closely with a lot of the theories that you had previously held. So I thought it would be an interesting article for you to read, and I will send the link for it along. The other article I read was a meta-analysis of animal-assisted therapy. So this study looked at 250 articles and studies on animal-assisted therapy. Specifically, they wanted to know the average effect of animal-assisted therapy, and it found that the strongest findings were that animal-assisted therapy has a positive influence on medical well-being, and the overall behavioral outcomes were positive when animal-assisted therapy was introduced. As well, it reduces autism spectrum symptoms. So, for the most part, I'd say this certainly adds credibility to your findings, as it's based on 250 studies, and they accounted for a variety of variables and really carefully coded all their information and documentation. So it's a really in-depth qualitative study of all these studies. So I'd say it's a really credible resource that certainly would back up your understandings on how animals can improve the overall health and well-being of people. Additionally, their reference list, if you ever wanted to back up anything, any of your theories, I would certainly consult their reference list, as it would definitely give you a jumping point for other articles having to do with animal-assisted therapy. So yeah. Oh, also, just as a practical note, I already mentioned this, sorry, that there are education programs in your area, such as the Peterborough Zoo. So if you're looking at in your particular school board, there's educational programs in the Peterborough Zoo that are specifically catered to the curriculum, as well as the Toronto Zoo, which, although isn't in your particular area or in your particular school board, it's still close enough that you could visit. Also, your school board has 4 outdoor education centers, and those are their respective websites. And then I also found a document that outlined programs for those 4 outdoor educational centers, many of which include sort of animal investigations and whatnot. So they have a whole slew of programs outlined. So I will be sure to send all of that along. Also, when I was doing searches, farms in your area are a good place to start if you want to bring students to go and interact with animals. So hopefully that gives you a rough idea of where you can get the rules and regulations, talk to your principal, consult board documents, and a jumping point for what's available in your particular area.